Hello, darling. I was thinking some stuff, and it seemed worth sharing. I was thinking about the links between tabletop games and popular media. And I was thinking about flipping the game and how that works, and why it sometimes works so well. As a child, I played the board games and card games that many other children did. Cluedo and Monopoly, chess and backgammon. I played games with standard decks of playing cards, rummy or pontoon or patience, and I also had top trumps cards and a few other games with specialist decks. When I was older, I started playing role-playing games like Dungeons & Dragons, Rolemaster and Spacemaster, or Golden Heroes. These were storytelling games and were very different from the board games and card games that I'd played as a child. You normally weren't competing with other players but rather cooperating, pooling your skills and resources to overcome obstacles and working together to achieve goals. You can sometimes carry on telling the stories of the same group of characters for years. The choices that you make in one game can come back to haunt you many months later. Actions have consequences that outlive one evening's play. Because we are now talking about a process of collaborative storytelling, the patterns of story become relevant. Characters can have narrative arcs. You can find yourself really caring about what might happen next, because characters whose story is told over months or years create more engagement than you can achieve by just cracking open Monopoly. In a game like D&D, the heavy lifting of setting up that story is done by the Dungeon Master. They lay down the plot threads that the players can then braid together to create their narrative. One of the options available to an overworked DM is to buy a pre-created adventure module. This will provide you with a series of games for your players to progress through, with a range of maps and floor plans for you to make use of, as well as pre-generated antagonists and supporting cast. These modules aren't cheap, and you can easily pay 30 or 40 quid for one. You do get quite a few months of games for that, but it does feel weird to some people to buy a game book that will eventually be used up and done. I mean, it is technically possible to run the whole sequence again for a new group of players. But for you and your group of old friends, who you get together with to roleplay, each of these pre-created scenarios only gets used the one time. I mean, don't get me wrong, the core rulebooks are also stupidly expensive, but they are infinitely reusable and can literally set you up for a lifetime of ongoing play. This is not a video about why things cost what they cost in late-stage capitalism. If there wasn't a market for pre-created adventure modules, then the D&D people wouldn't keep making them. I assume that market is DMs who don't have time to come up with new adventures, but do have the spare cash to buy modules. Maybe, as well as DMs who don't have the time, I should include DMs who simply don't enjoy coming up with new adventures. I would bet that there are some other DMs who also spend their spare time writing fanfic on AO3, or writing stories about their own original characters. And I would guess that these DMs, who are also writers, are less likely to buy in pre-created adventure modules. Coming up with the next part of the story is, for them, part of the fun. These connections between role-playing games and other sorts of storytelling run both ways. Just as the collaborative storytellers who play games might also enjoy writing, so also the readers or viewers of popular books or shows might want to then role-play as their favourite characters. Creating official role-playing games is absolutely part of the merchandising of popular shows. There have been official role-playing games for Star Trek, Star Wars, Game of Thrones, and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's not just the kind of geeky shows that you might expect, either. Dallas had a role-playing game back in the 80s. These games often allow you to choose either to play as characters from the show or to play original characters that you create who exist in the broader world of the show. Time passed, as time does. I grew up, had kids of my own, and played children's games with them when they were children. When they grew up, they in turn introduced me to a whole new world of tabletop gaming that hadn't existed in my youth. Games like Catan and Ticket to Ride, like Dominion and Flux and Pandemic, are part of a 21st century generation of tabletop games. They aren't role-playing games where you play ongoing plots that last for months or years. These are games that might last for an hour or an evening, but they have dynamics built into them such that each game is different than the last one. Unlike something like chess, where the board always starts the same and the player's goals never alter, these new games tend to mix things up a little. In Catan, the island which players are settling on is made of pieces of hexagonal card, which get shuffled during setup. This means that the map, showing where different resources are available, is different every time. A winning strategy in one game might not work so well in the next one. In Ticket to Ride, players earn points by building train routes connecting different cities. Which two cities you are trying to connect, though, that varies from game to game and from player to player within the game. You know the goals that you are aiming for, but you don't get to see your opponent's goals. Dominion is a deck-building game. There are lots of different possible supply cards in the box, but each game only uses 10 of these card types, randomly chosen at setup. Every player starts with the same basic deck, and they all have the same goal of earning victory points. But the way to earn them is to buy from the 10 randomly chosen supply piles, and so the tactics of one game will be very different from the tactics of the next. Flux takes the idea of each game being different to extremes, since the rules of the game are decided by the cards in play. How many cards you draw or play each turn, what the size of the hand limit is, what the goal is that players need to meet to win the game, all of these things change constantly as each player lays down new rule cards that supersede the old ones. Pandemic, which is a game that I've loved for many years now, since long before COVID came along, uses one of the most original and effective techniques that I know of to ratchet up tension as the game goes on. It is a co-op game, with all the players working together to try to save the world from a series of plagues. Each card in the infection deck indicates a city on the map which gets hit. An infection cube is placed on that city, and the card is placed on a discard pile. If a city accumulates more than 3 infection cubes, then the problem overflows to other connected cities, so the players are hopping around the map, curing things to prevent this from happening. When an epidemic card is drawn, however, one of the effects is that the infection discard pile is shuffled and then put back on top of the infection deck. This is such a simple twist, but it's genius, because the effect can be devastating. It means that, for the next few turns, you will not be infecting random cities all around the world. All of the cards at the top of that deck are now the very cities that have already been hit, most of which will still have cubes on them from the earlier infection. And this continues to happen at regular intervals throughout the game, ratcheting up the tension. In those games where we win, when the players do successfully save the world, the sense of victory is real. The reason why the game is so effective and engaging is that it uses the ticking clock of escalating tension as effectively as any Hollywood thriller. It is a masterpiece of game design. I talked earlier about merchandising for shows or movies, including official role-playing games. As you might expect, they also include official board games and card games. One of my favourite examples of this, personally, is the Firefly board game. The Firefly TV series and the movie Serenity that spun out of it have a very loyal geek following. As a fan of the show and also a keen tabletop player, I was obviously going to buy the official board game and try it out. What I hadn't expected, though, was just how good it was going to be. The build quality is fabulous, and the effective use of references and in-jokes makes it clear that the designers of the game love the show just as much as we do. They succeeded, by some rare alchemy, in producing a game that really captures the feel of the show. I have spent many happy hours playing Firefly. If you too love this show, then I can't recommend it enough. Tabletop games, like role-playing games, are not cheap. But the replay value means that many of us still find the cost to be money well spent. They are a well that will not run dry. Each game on my shelf has just as many hours of fun left in it today as it did 10 years ago. Or, at least, that's what I would have told you 10 years ago. It is still mostly true, but now there are one or two exceptions. And I can't easily explain them to you. There are a few games that I now own that actually do have real limits on their replayability baked into them, in ways that ought to make them bad value for money. But they are just so good. The particular game I have in mind is called Pandemic Legacy. This is a spin-off of Pandemic, a game that you already know I adore, but set in a post-apocalyptic world. You aren't trying to prevent the plagues, you're trying to help rebuild the society that they destroyed. Legacy turns the traditional game on its head, and it does that slowly over the course of a year. In each month of that year, the rules of the game shift and change. If you win the January game, then you move on to the February game. If you lose that first game, then you do get one more attempt at January, but that's it. Lose twice, and you move on to February regardless. In each month of the year, you get either 1 or 2 games. Win, or lose and then win, or lose and then lose, and move on anyway. When I talked about role-playing games earlier, I said that your choices have consequences that outlive one evening's play. The same is true in Legacy. As you work to reclaim the world, you make changes to the map, uncovering new areas by attaching stickers that allow you to access new cities, or drawing on lines of connection. By the time you reach March or April, the map you were playing on in January has radically changed. The choices that you made in earlier months can give you advantages later in the year, or disadvantages. So here is this game that I've paid a lot of money for, and I can only play it a limited number of times. 24 at most. It makes no sense that I should love it, but I do. I love it because it has something more valuable to me than replayability. It has a plot. It has arcs and twists. It has tension, not just within each game, but across the games. When the company released this, they didn't just call it Pandemic Legacy, they called it Pandemic Legacy Season 1. I am playing this game with my wife and our eldest son. We adored Season 1, and we're currently almost halfway through Season 2. Our son lives quite a way away from us, and we only get to see him a few times a year. For us, this is like an event board game. I think of it like one of the prestige miniseries that you see on the telly sometimes, with only 6 episodes and a cast of Hollywood A-listers. For a show like that, you're never going to get quantity, but it might make up for it with quality. It might have fabulous production values, and a kick-ass writing team, and a plot that gets its teeth into you and makes you feel things. For me, I think that is the real link between tabletop games and popular media. It isn't the official Dallas role-playing game. It's the way that the structure of a good story can engage us and make us care about things. It can be lovely, of course, to just chill and spend an evening goofing around with old friends and having fun. Some of my favourite games, though, have plot arcs and ticking clocks of tension and characters striving to overcome obstacles, and all those storytelling tricks that make us love our favourite shows as much as we do. Anyway, that's what I was thinking about, and it felt worth sharing. See you soon.